But often, Russell, if you answer a question indirectly, it can be more interesting than if you answer a question directly.
Jangle pop is an interesting genre definition because it essentially hit mainstream popularity just as quickly as it faded away. Today I'm talking about the album Strangeways, Here We Come by the Smiths, if the thumbnail didn't give it away. And as with this video, Jangle pop is an essential element to the record and the Smiths' music. However, there are many more distinctions that made the Smiths unique. Strangways was the last of the 4 studio Smiths records, which directly followed what many consider to be their finest work, The Queen is Dead. The reason why I'm focusing on Strangways for this video instead of any of the other Smiths records is not because I'm going to make the argument that it's the best Smiths album, though I'm partially partial to that opinion. Rather, I think that this album perfectly encapsulates the sheer essence of the Smiths' music, better than any of their other records. Now, I won't get into the whole backstory of the Smiths as a band, but I will mention one of the causes of the breakup being Johnny Marr's departure. Johnny Marr was the guitarist and co-songwriter of the group, and the cause of the first defining characteristic, the jangle pop. Jangle pop is essentially a branch of post-punk music focused on very pop-driven, hook-filled melodies, but also jangly guitars, reminiscent of bands like the Byrds. And one of the reasons why Marr left the band was because he didn't want them to become genre-confined. And because of that, Strangeways is a much more eclectic record in terms of general sounds in songs than the average Smiths record. Though, as mentioned, the jangle element is still definitely present, particularly in the first single release from the record, Girlfriend in a Coma. Now, the Smiths have always been a group to mix happy-sounding instrumentation with very melancholic, sometimes criminally insane lyrics, but this is an example of that working to absolute perfection. The jangle element from the instrumentation of the song, particularly through Marr's guitar pieces, give the song a really distinct feel. It's very poppy in essence, but it's not necessarily what would be go around with the term 80s pop music. When you think of 80s pop music, you wouldn't necessarily think of this sound, at least I wouldn't. And Morrissey's vocal and lyrics are both extremely contradictory to the very happy sounding guitar lines from Marr, but I think that only propels the song because it keeps it from being a meaningless pop song, while also having the poppy elements, the jangly guitars, engage the listener with extremely catchy hooks and just interesting melodies. And overall, I think that this is probably the most clear-cut example of the perfect jangle pop song off this album. But I'd also like to mention the closing track, I Won't Share You. This is a track that I rarely hear people mention, but I think it's fundamentally important to the closure of the Smiths as a band. As with many Smiths songs, the lyrics of the track could be interpreted in many ways. However, I really like the interpretation relating the lyricism to Morrissey's jealousy of Johnny Marr's collaboration with other artists. Musically, the song is much more somber than Girlfriend in a Coma, not presenting much of a dichotomy between the lyricism and vocal delivery with the musical elements. In this song, they both sort of work together very well. But it's still really interesting listening to Marr's strumming pattern in particular. This could just be me coming straight out of left field, but I think that I'm fascinated by the strumming pattern and the guitar melody of this song because of how intricate it is for sounding so simple. And I think that's just a testament to Marr's ability to not only articulate immensely catchy, jangly guitar melodies, but also provide more somber tracks, equally engaging and masterfully articulate phrases. So that is the jangle pop element to the Smiths' music. But what is it about the Smiths that goes beyond that? What took them out of the, I guess, indie pop realm and brought them into the mainstream? And I think that there are 2 other factors that helped influence this. One being what I guess you could call their sad boy music style. Now, I absolutely hate saying that because if you were to look up sad boy music on YouTube, you'd get something like this. And I would very much recommend not clicking on these because it's generally pretty repulsive. But back in the 80s, sad boy music was a bit different. Bands like The Cure clearly defined a genre of music based around lyrics that were emotional but not emo, at least not in the way that you would think of today, gothic in a way, and sometimes pretty pathetic. Not that the lyrical quality was poor, but the picture painted with the lyrics was often of pitiful characters that are all too easy to empathize with. Now, the clearest example of this in the Smiths' music, perhaps in the entire Smiths' discography, is the track Last Night I Dreamt That Somebody Loved Me. The title alone should cue you into the feeling this song portrays. But I would argue merely classifying the song as sad or pathetic would overwhelmingly diminish the quality of the craftsmanship here. The song opens with a nearly 2-minute instrumental-led opening, backed with essentially a field recording of the British coal mining strike, which I guess is a little odd, but it definitely builds this atmosphere for the song that works fantastically. But then the song erupts into a grand ballad, with Morrissey proclaiming, "Last night I dreamt that somebody loved me. No hope, no harm, just another false alarm." Now, I hope that you've all heard these songs before, because I partially feel that reading out the lyrics is like ruining the punchline of a joke. The flow of Morrissey's delivery produces such a gut punch when the lines hit you. And I remember hearing them from the first time and being absolutely blown away by the simplicity. And I guess that you expect something with a sort of sad boy song. It's not really considered a genre that is to be lyrically profound, but the simplicity in the actual words combined with the way that they're presented in the song just works so well. And I guess that leads us into the third element of the Smiths' music, which you could sort of classify with the previous one, being their perfect use of subversive lyricism. Now, there are many different ways of approaching writing the lyrics of a song. Just on the channel recently, I did a video over the Beach Boys' Surf's Up song, and that is enigmatic, filled with literary references. There's like nothing in it that can be taken at face value. Otherwise, it just makes no sense at all. And then there's other lyricism, which I guess is typically associated with general pop music, where there's nothing really of substance to the lyrics. They just might sound good in a particular melody. The Smiths don't really fall in either of those categories, at least not fully, because most of the time the lyrics are fairly simple. They aren't always filled with references, and most of the time anyone could gather the meaning of the song just by listening to it, though there are always reasons to delve more deep into the meaning of the lyricism. But sometimes Morrissey will just come out of nowhere and just hit you with like an what I would consider an Elvis Costello type, extremely wordy passage that is just perfect. So if you don't really know what I'm comparing to with Elvis Costello, here are some lyrics from his song, The Other Side of Summer. And I mean, you could pause that to read them, but the sheer amount of words that this man puts into the song, you know, it could easily turn away some people. Some people obviously consider Elvis Costello to be too wordy for their liking, but I think it's just great. And, you know, you kind of be hard-pressed to find a Smith song that doesn't implement some form of subversive lyricism in a way. And I would say that they pretty much do it better than everyone. Now, it would be remiss of me to not mention the song Big Mouth Strikes Again, even though it's not on this album, just because it's probably the most famous, most widespread appealing example of this in a Smith song. The track is overwhelmingly poppy, filled with hooks, being quite possibly their most overtly pop song. But the lyrics are not so much. Sweetness, I was only joking when I said I'd like to smash every tooth in your head. And you know, that's something to put in a pop song, just one of those curveballs every once in a while. But I love that in the Smiths' music. Unhappy Birthday off this album, Strangeways, takes a similar approach throughout the whole track. Like every time that it gets to I'm gonna kill my dog line, it just kills me because it's so out of nowhere. But I think that the best example of this in a song is pretty much the thesis of the video. The song that takes everything that I've talked about, implements it into one. The most emblematic Smith song. Not that it's necessarily the best Smith song. I wouldn't even say that it's my favorite. But a song that I think perfectly captures their whole essence. Stop me if you think you've heard this one before. Again, if you haven't heard the song before, I would strongly recommend giving it a listen before my analysis. But here we go. Stop Me If You've Heard This One Before is a pop song. That is pretty irrefutable. It's filled with memorable melodies, jangly guitars, and super catchy hooks. But it also has my favorite example of Morrissey's writing style. First you get the gut punch, with Morrissey saying, "Stop me if you think you've heard this one before. Nothing's changed. I still love you. Oh, I still love you. Only slightly less than I used to," which I think is just genius. Not only because of how the song's build-up and progression prolongs the hit, but also just because of how wonderfully presented it is through the melody and through Morrissey's delivery. And if that didn't sell you on the song, on top of that, you get one of my favorite lines of all time that when I first noticed that this was said in the song, it was hard to believe because of the words, the lack of rhythm to them in a certain sense. But you could listen to the song, not even notice them. They work that well. Here we go. I crashed down on the crossbar, and the pain was enough to make a shy, bald Buddhist reflect and plan a mass murder. Now, I can't tell you it's a perfect song and make you believe me, but I honestly think that the Smiths, as a whole, were one of the best bands of all time. They helped define jangle pop by incorporating jangly guitars and overt poppy melodies into their songs at a time when the genre was in its infancy. But they surpassed the independent realm that is so often characterizing jangle pop by their use of very clever, very literate, and relatable lyrics. The songcraft wouldn't survive without the sentiment, and the sentiment could easily fall into overly sentimental territory if not for the masterful songcraft.
I'm afraid, yes, I'm somewhat of a back bedroom casualty. I spent a great deal of time sitting in the bedroom writing furiously and feeling that I was terribly important and that everything that I wrote would go down in the annals of history or whatever. And it's proved to be quite true. How much I really liked you.